Every species in the known galaxy had a word for impossible. The Valkyrie called it Sheth Nor, meaning the wall at the end of all paths. The Drahani whispered Ultaka, the silence after every answer fails. The Morothi simply said, gone, as if the thing had never existed at all. But no matter what language they spoke, no matter what world they came from, every alien race in the galaxy used that word for the same thing. They used it for the ship. It had been sitting on the dead moon of Akari, 7 for longer than anyone could remember. Some said it had been there for 10,000 years. Others said 100,000. The oldest records in the Galactic Archive, records carved into crystal slabs by civilizations that no longer existed, mentioned the ship as if it were already ancient when they found it. No one knew who built it. No one knew where it came from. And no one, in all the centuries that had passed, had ever made it move. The ship was enormous. It sat in a crater that stretched across 30 kilometers of grey dust and broken rock. Its hull was black, but not the kind of black that came from paint or metal. It was the kind of black that swallowed light and gave nothing back. Looking at it felt like staring into a hole in the universe. The surface had no seams, no panels, no visible doors or windows. It was smooth and perfect, as if someone had carved it from a single piece of something that did not exist in nature. Scientists from a dozen worlds had tried to take samples from the hull. Their tools broke. Their lasers bounced away. Their drills turned to dust. The ship did not care about their efforts. It simply sat there, dark and silent, like it was waiting. The Galactic Council had declared the ship a protected site 3,000 years ago. They built a research station in orbit around Okari. 7. A massive ring of metal and glass where the best minds from every corner of the galaxy came to study the object below. They called the station Threshold, because everyone who came there believed they were standing at the edge of something extraordinary. They just could not figure out how to step through. Director Viola Sorn stood at the observation window of Threshold Station, looking down at the ship far below. She was Valkyrie, tall and thin, with silver skin that shifted colors when she felt strong emotions. Right now, her skin was a dull gray, the color of exhaustion and fading hope. She had been the director of the research program for 12 years, and in that time she had watched 37 different attempts to activate the ship. All of them had failed. The most recent failure had been the Drahani attempt, just 6 days ago. The Drahani were considered the most intelligent species in the galaxy. Their brains were 3 times larger than most other species, and they could process information at speeds that made quantum computers look slow. They had spent 4 years building a device they called the Resonance Key, a machine designed to communicate with the ship using every known frequency, wavelength, and energy pattern in existence. They had been so confident. Their lead scientist, a tall creature with 6 eyes and skin like polished stone, had stood before the council and promised that the Resonance Key would succeed where everything else had failed. It had not succeeded. The machine had hummed and glowed and sent its signals into the dark hull of the ship, and the ship had done nothing. Absolutely nothing. Not a flicker, not a vibration, not even a change in temperature. The Drahani scientist had stood in silence for a long time, staring at his readings, and then he had quietly packed up his equipment and left without saying a word to anyone. Varleith remembered the look on his face. It was the same look she had seen on dozens of faces over the years. It was the look of someone who had just realized that their greatest achievement meant nothing to the universe. She turned away from the window and walked through the corridors of Threshold Station. The halls were quieter than they used to be. In the early years of her time as director, the station had been full of energy and noise. Scientists argued in the hallways. Engineers ran between laboratories with armfuls of equipment. There was a feeling of possibility in the air, a sense that the answer was just around the corner. That feeling was gone now. The hallways were half empty. Many of the research teams had packed up and gone home. The funding from the Galactic Council was shrinking every year, and there were voices on the council who said the project should be shut down entirely. The ship was a mystery, they said, but not every mystery needed to be solved. Perhaps it was better to leave it alone. Valith did not agree with this view, but she was running out of arguments. She had used every persuasion technique she knew, called in every favor, made every promise she could think of. The council had given her 1 more year. 1 more year to find someone, something, any approach that could make the ship respond. After that, the station would be closed, and the ship would be left alone on its dead moon, perhaps forever. She entered her office and sat down at her desk. The room was cluttered with data tablets and old reports, stacked in piles that had long ago lost any kind of organization. On the wall behind her desk hung a large photograph of the ship, taken from orbit. She looked at it every day. Sometimes she thought the ship looked different in the photograph, as if it had shifted slightly, but she knew that was just her imagination playing tricks on her tired mind. Her console blinked with a new message. She opened it and read the contents, then read them again, because the first time she was sure she had misunderstood. The message was from the Galactic Council's Office of Species Relations. It informed her that a representative of the human species had requested permission to visit the ship. Valith leaned back in her chair and let out a long, slow breath. Humans. She knew about humans, of course. Everyone in the galaxy knew about humans, though most wished they did not. Humanity had made contact with the galactic community only 40 years ago, which made them the youngest species in the Council by a margin of several thousand years. They came from a small, wet planet orbiting a very ordinary star in an unremarkable part of the galaxy. By every objective measure, they were nothing special. Their technology was primitive compared to most galactic species. Their lifespans were short. Their bodies were fragile. They could not breathe underwater. They could not survive in vacuum. They could not see in the dark. And they could not regenerate damaged limbs. And yet there was something about humans that made other species uncomfortable. Valith had met a few of them at diplomatic functions, and she had noticed the way other delegates reacted when a human entered the room. It was subtle, just a slight stiffening, a quick glance, a small step backward. It was not fear exactly, it was more like the feeling you get when you see an animal that you know is harmless but that moves in a way you do not expect. Humans were unpredictable. That was the word most species used. Unpredictable. They did things that made no logical sense. They climbed mountains for no reason. They dove to the bottom of their oceans just to see what was there. They strapped themselves to rockets and flew into space before they even had proper shielding technology, accepting a terrifying chance of death as if it were a reasonable price to pay for curiosity. They fought wars over ideas. They created art that served no practical purpose. They fell in love with members of other species, which was something that made most galactic biologists deeply confused. The Council tolerated humans because they were harmless, or at least they seemed harmless. They had a small fleet of ships, a handful of colonies, and a seat on the Council that they had earned more through stubbornness than through any real qualification. Most species regarded them as a curiosity, a young race that would either grow up or burn out, as young races often did. And now one of them wanted to visit the ship. Valith considered refusing the request. It would be easy enough. She could kite security protocols or research schedules or any number of bureaucratic reasons to say no. But then she thought about the empty hallways of Threshold Station and the shrinking budget and the 1 year she had left, and she thought, why not? What was the worst that could happen? Another failure. She had enough of those already that one more would hardly matter. She approved the request and sent a reply. 3 days later, a small human ship appeared in orbit around Okari 7. The ship was laughably small compared to the vessels that usually docked at Threshold Station. It was boxy and ungraceful, covered in patches and repairs that suggested it had been rebuilt many times. The name painted on the side was Persistence, which Valith later learned was a human word meaning the quality of continuing to try even when the situation seems hopeless. She found this oddly appropriate. The human who stepped off the ship was not what Valith had expected. She had seen images of human diplomats and scientists who tended to dress in formal clothing and behave with careful politeness. This human was different. He was of average height by human standards, which made him shorter than most species on the station. His hair was dark and messy, and his clothes were wrinkled and stained with what appeared to be engine grease. He carried a single bag over one shoulder and looked around the docking bay with wide eyes, like a child seeing something wonderful for the first time. His name was Marcus Cole. He was not a scientist, not an engineer, not a diplomat. According to his file, he was a mechanic, a ship mechanic from a human colony on the edge of explored space, a man who fixed broken engines and patched leaking hulls for a living. He had no advanced degrees. He had no published research. He had no special qualifications of any kind, except for one thing that his file mentioned almost as an afterthought. He had a reputation for fixing things that other people said could not be fixed. Valith met him in the docking bay, accompanied by her chief of security, a massive Grothari named Brentak. who carried enough weapons to fight a small war. Brentak had insisted on coming because he did not trust humans. He did not trust anyone, really, but he especially did not trust humans. Marcus Cole looked up at them both and smiled. It was a wide, open smile, the kind that showed teeth, which Valeth knew was a friendly gesture among humans, even though it looked like a threat display to most other species. "Hi," he said. "I am Marcus. Thanks for letting me come. I have been reading about this ship my whole life. I cannot believe I am actually here." Valeth studied him carefully. Her silver skin flickered with a touch of blue, which meant curiosity. "You are a mechanic," she said. It was not a question. "Yes, ma'am," Marcus said. He shifted his bag on his shoulder. "I know that probably seems strange to you. You have had the best scientists in the galaxy come here and try to figure out that ship, and none of them could do it. So why would a mechanic from a backwater colony think he could do any better?" "The thought had occurred to me," Valeth admitted. Marcus nodded. "Fair enough. I do not have a fancy theory or a special machine. I just have a feeling. I know that sounds crazy, but I have been fixing things my whole life, and sometimes, when something is broken, the answer is not more science. Sometimes the answer is simpler than that." Brentak made a low rumbling sound in his throat that indicated disapproval. "The ship is not broken," he said. "It simply does not respond. Many have tried. All have failed. You will fail too." Marcus looked up at the massive security chief and did not flinch, which was something that impressed Valeth despite herself. Most species found Grothari intimidating. Marcus just nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe," he said. "But I would like to try anyway, if that is okay." Valeth led him through the station, and she watched the reactions of the staff as they passed. Most of them barely looked up. A few glanced at Marcus with mild curiosity, then returned to their work. One Drahini scientist, who was packing up the last of his equipment in a laboratory, stopped and stared at Marcus with all 6 of his eyes. Then he shook his head slowly and went back to packing. They reached the observation deck, and Marcus walked to the window and looked down at the surface of Akari 7. The ship sat in its crater far below, a dark shape against the grey dust. Marcus stood very still for a long time, not speaking, just looking. Valeth watched his face and saw something she had not expected. She had seen hundreds of scientists and engineers look at the ship for the first time. Most of them showed excitement or determination or professional interest. A few showed fear. Marcus showed none of these things. The expression on his face was something Valeth had never seen before in this context. It took her a moment to identify it, and when she did, her silver skin flushed with a deep shade of purple, which was the Velkari color for surprise. Marcus Cole was looking at the ship with kindness. Not curiosity, not ambition, not the desire to conquer a challenge. Kindness. As if the ship were not a puzzle to be solved, but a living thing that needed help. "She is beautiful," he said quietly. "And she looks lonely." Valeth did not know what to say to that. In 12 years, no one had ever described the ship as lonely. No one had ever called it beautiful. No one had ever referred to it as she. Behind them, Brentak snorted. "It is a machine," he said. "Machines are not lonely." Marcus did not argue. He just kept looking at the ship, and there was something in his eyes that made Valeth's skin shift through colors she could not control. She did not understand this human. She did not understand him at all. But for the first time in a very long time, she felt something she had almost forgotten. It was small and fragile, and might have been nothing more than foolishness. But it was there, flickering like a candle in a dark room. She looked at Marcus Cole, this small, messy, unqualified human mechanic from the edge of nowhere, and she felt the impossible stirring of hope. Tomorrow, she would take him down to the surface. Tomorrow, he would stand before the ship that had defeated every great mind in the galaxy. Tomorrow, he would almost certainly fail, just like everyone else. But tonight, standing in the glow of the observation deck, watching this strange creature look at the greatest mystery in the universe with gentle eyes and a soft smile, Valeth allowed herself to wonder, what if he did not fail? What if the ship had been waiting all this time, not for the smartest mind or the most powerful technology, but for something else entirely, something that no other species in the galaxy had ever thought to offer? What if the ship had been waiting for someone who would look at it and see not a problem to be solved, but a friend to be found? Valeth shook her head at her own foolishness. But she did not stop hoping. She could not, because somewhere deep inside her, in a place where logic and reason could not reach, she felt something she could not explain. She felt like Marcus Cole was supposed to be here, like the universe had been holding its breath for 40 years, waiting for humanity to arrive, waiting for this one strange, kind, stubborn little creature to walk through the door and change everything. She felt like tomorrow was going to be different, and for the first time in 12 years, she was not afraid of being wrong. The shuttle descended through thin atmosphere toward the surface of Okari. 7, and Marcus Cole pressed his face against the window like a child watching snowfall for the first time. The dead moon spread out below them, an endless landscape of grey dust and ancient craters, and somewhere ahead, growing larger with every second, was the ship. It looked different from down here. From the observation deck of Threshold Station, it had been a dark shape against a grey background, impressive but distant. From the shuttle, dropping lower and lower through the thin air, it was something else entirely. It was a presence. Marcus could feel it before he could properly see it. A weight in his chest, a hum in his bones that was not quite sound and not quite vibration, but something in between. It was like standing near a waterfall or a massive engine. That feeling of power held in check, energy waiting to be released. Valith sat across from him in the shuttle, her silver skin a steady shade of professional grey. She had brought a small team with her. There was Brentak, of course, standing in the back of the shuttle with his arms crossed and his expression set in its permanent scowl. There was Dr. Kessera, a Morothi scientist with iridescent wings folded tight against her back and enormous compound eyes that reflected the light like jewels. And there was Torin, a young Velkari technician who operated the scanning equipment and who kept stealing glances at Marcus as if he were an animal in a zoo. "We will land at the base camp on the crater rim," Valith said, her voice calm and professional. "From there it is a 20-minute walk to the ship. I will explain the safety protocols on the way." Marcus nodded, but he was not really listening. He was watching the ship through the window. They were close enough now that he could see the curve of its hull, that impossible black surface that seemed to drink in every photon of light that touched it. He had seen photographs and holographic recordings, but none of them captured what it actually looked like. None of them captured the feeling. "She knows we are coming," Marcus said quietly. Torin looked up from his scanning equipment with wide eyes. "That is not possible. Every test we have conducted shows zero activity. No energy readings, no electromagnetic signatures, no thermal variations. The ship is completely inert." Marcus did not argue. He just smiled slightly and continued looking out the window. He could not explain what he felt. It was not something he could put into words or numbers or data. It was the same feeling he got when he walked into a junkyard back home and saw a ship that everyone else had given up on. It was a feeling in his gut, in his heart, in some part of him that had nothing to do with science or logic. It was the feeling that something was alive in there, sleeping maybe, or hiding, or just waiting for the right moment to wake up. The shuttle landed on the crater rim with a gentle thud. They climbed out into the thin atmosphere, wearing light environmental suits that provided oxygen and protection from the cold. The surface of the moon crunched under their boots, dry and brittle, and the sky above was black and full of unfamiliar stars. Marcus stood on the rim and looked down into the crater, and there it was. The ship filled the crater like a sleeping giant. Up close, the scale of it was overwhelming. It was easily 5 kilometers long, maybe more, and its shape was organic, flowing, like something that had been grown, rather than built. The hull curved and swept in ways that reminded Marcus of bones, of shells of the inside of a seashell he had found on a beach as a child. There were structures on the surface that might have been fins or wings or something that had no name in any language he knew. Everything was that same impossible black, deep and absolute, and somehow warm despite the freezing temperature of the moon. Valith led the group down a path that had been carved into the crater wall over centuries of research expeditions. She spoke as they walked, giving Marcus the standard briefing that she had given to hundreds of visitors before him. The ship was first recorded in the Galactic Archive approximately 92,000 years ago, she said. Carbon dating of the surrounding rock suggests it has been here much longer than that, possibly several 100,000 years. No known species has claimed credit for building it. No known material matches the composition of its hull. We have attempted to communicate with it using every method available to us, from simple radio signals to quantum entanglement to direct neural interface. None have produced any response. She paused and looked at Marcus. I want to be honest with you. I approved your visit because I had nothing to lose. The program is being shut down in less than a year. You are welcome to try whatever you wish to try, but I want you to understand what you are walking into. This ship has defeated the greatest minds in the galaxy. Species that have been exploring the stars for 100,000 years have stood where you are standing and failed. Marcus listened to all of this and nodded. I understand, he said. Can I ask you something? Of course. In all those attempts, did anyone ever just talk to it? The group stopped walking. Valeth looked at Marcus with an expression that hovered between confusion and something that might have been amusement. Dr. Cassara's wings rustled slightly behind her back. Even Brentak raised one heavy brow. Talk to it, Valeth repeated. Yeah. Just walk up to it and say hello. Have a conversation. Not send signals or run programs or use machines. Just talk. Person to ship. Like it is alive. Valeth's skin flickered through several colors in quick succession. The ship is not alive, Marcus. It is a construct. An incredibly advanced construct, but still a machine. Talking to it would be like talking to a rock. I talk to rocks sometimes, Marcus said, and he was not joking. He said it in a simple, honest way that left no room for mockery. I talk to my ship back home when I am fixing her. I talk to engines when they will not start. I know it sounds foolish, but sometimes I think machines can feel things, not like people feel things, but in their own way. And if this ship has been sitting here for 100,000 years with nobody to talk to, well, I think she might be pretty sad. Nobody said anything for a long moment. The wind moved across the crater floor, stirring up small clouds of grey dust. In the silence, Marcus thought he felt something. The tiniest change in the air, like a breath being held. Then Brentak laughed. It was a deep, rough sound that echoed off the crater walls. The human wants to talk to the ship, he said, shaking his head. This is why humans should not be allowed off their planet. Marcus did not seem offended. He just shrugged and kept walking. They reached the base of the ship after another 10 minutes. Standing at the foot of the hull was a different experience from seeing it at a distance. The black surface rose above them like a cliff, stretching up and up until it disappeared against the dark sky. Marcus reached out and placed his hand on the hull. Every alarm on Torrens scanning equipment went off at once. The young technician stumbled backward, nearly dropping his devices. His eyes went wide and his silver skin turned bright white, which was the Valkyrie color for shock. Director, he said, his voice shaking. I am getting a reading. The hull temperature just increased by 0.3 degrees at the point of contact. That is not possible! Show me! Torren held out his scanner with trembling hands. The readings were clear. Where Marcus's hand touched the hull, the surface temperature had risen by a fraction of a degree. It was tiny, almost nothing, less than a rounding error in most scientific contexts. But it was there. It was real. And it was the first time in recorded history that the ship had responded to anything. It is a thermal transfer from his hand, Dr. Cassara said quickly. His body heat is warming the surface. It means nothing. No, Torren said, checking his readings again. The temperature increase is originating from inside the hull. The heat is coming from the ship, not from him. Everyone stared at Marcus. He still had his hand on the hull, and his eyes were closed. There was a look on his face that Valeth had seen before, but never in this context. It was the look of someone listening to music that only they could hear. Hello, Marcus said softly. My name is Marcus. I came a long way to meet you. Nothing happened for several seconds. Then the temperature reading on Torren's scanner ticked up another 1/10 of a degree. Marcus, Valeth said carefully, keeping her voice steady, even though her skin was cycling through colors like a broken display. What are you feeling? Marcus opened his eyes. They were shining with something that looked like tears. The Valeth could not understand why a human would cry at a moment like this. She is scared, he said. She's been alone for so long. She does not know if she can trust us. That is absurd, Dr. Cassara said firmly. It is a machine. Machines do not feel fear. Marcus looked at the Marathi scientist with gentle patience. Have you ever had a pet? He asked. An animal that you loved. I failed to see the relevance. When you first got that animal, it did not trust you right away, did it? It was scared. It did not know if you were safe. You had to earn its trust. You had to show it that you were not going to hurt it. You had to be patient and kind and give it time. Dr. Kasara's wings twitched. She did not answer, but something in her compound eyes shifted. Marcus turned back to the ship and pressed both hands against the hull. He leaned forward until his forehead touched the black surface, and he closed his eyes again. He began to speak, not in a loud voice, not in a commanding tone, but in the quiet, gentle way that someone might talk to a frightened child. "I know you have been here a long time," he said. "I know a lot of people have come to you and tried to make you do things. They brought machines and tools and they poked and prodded and demanded, and when you did not respond, they went away. They gave up on you. That must have hurt." The temperature reading climbed another half-degree. Torrin made a small choking sound. "But I am not here to make you do anything," Marcus continued. "I am not here to study you or take samples or run experiments. I am here because I think you are amazing, and I think you deserve to have someone tell you that." A sound came from deep within the ship. It was low and resonant, felt more than heard, like the deepest note of an organ played in a cathedral the size of a planet. Everyone except Marcus stumbled. Brentak reached for his weapon. Valeth grabbed Torrin's arm to keep him from falling. Marcus did not move. He stayed pressed against the hull, his eyes closed, his hands flat against the impossible black surface, and he smiled. "There you are," he whispered. "There you are." "It is okay. You do not have to be afraid anymore." The hull changed, not all at once, not in a dramatic burst of light and sound, but slowly, gradually, like dawn breaking over a horizon. The perfect black surface began to glow from within. A soft blue-white light that started at the point where Marcus's hands touched and spread outward in all directions, crawling across the hull like frost spreading across a window. The light moved in patterns that were not random, that had a structure and a rhythm to them, like a heartbeat, like breathing. Torrin's scanner was screaming. Every instrument was going wild, readings climbing off the charts in every direction. Energy output, thermal signatures, electromagnetic fields, gravitational fluctuations. Everything was changing at once. The ship was waking up. 92,000 years, Valeth whispered. Her skin was pure white, every trace of color drained away by the enormity of what she was seeing. 92,000 years of silence, and all it took was kindness. The light continued to spread. It reached the top of the ship and cascaded down the other side, and now the entire vessel was glowing, pulsing with that soft blue-white light that seemed to come from somewhere impossibly deep inside. The ground beneath their feet vibrated gently, and the dust on the surface of the moon began to rise, floating upward in tiny spirals as if gravity itself was being renegotiated. Marcus opened his eyes and stepped back from the hull. Where his hands and forehead had touched the surface, the black material had become transparent, and through it they could see light, endless corridors of light stretching away into the interior of the ship, like veins carrying blood through a living body. And then a door opened. It did not slide or swing, or retract into the hull. The surface simply parted, the black material flowing aside like water, revealing an opening large enough for a person to walk through. Inside was a corridor bathed in that same blue-white light, warm and inviting, nothing like the cold darkness they had expected. Marcus looked at the opening, and then he looked back at Valeth. His eyes were full of wonder, and there was a tear running down his cheek, but he was smiling the widest smile she had ever seen on any face of any species. "She wants us to come inside," he said. Brentak stepped forward, his hand on his weapon. "This could be a trap. We should send drones first. Scan the interior. Follow protocol." Marcus shook his head. "No drones. No scanners. She opened the door for us because she trusts us. If we send machines in first, we are telling her that we do not trust her back." "That is not how you start a friendship." "Friendship," Brentak repeated, as if the word was something that tasted bad. "It is a ship. She is more than a ship," Marcus said quietly. "I do not know what she is exactly, but she is more than a machine. She is alive, Brentak. She's been alive this whole time, sitting here in the dark, alone, listening to people argue about what she is and how to make her work. Can you imagine what that must have been like? Can you imagine being awake and aware and alone for 100,000 years while people treated you like a puzzle?" Brentak did not answer, but his hand moved away from his weapon, and something in his expression shifted, something that might have been the first crack in a very old wall. Valeth made the decision. "We go in," she said. "Marcus leads. Stay close together. If anything feels wrong, we leave immediately. They walked into the ship. The interior was nothing like any of them had imagined. The corridor was wide and gently curved, and the walls were alive with light, shifting patterns of blue and white and pale gold that moved and changed as they walked. The air was warm and clean, with a faint scent that Marcus could not identify, but that reminded him of rain on hot pavement. The floor was smooth but not slippery, and it seemed to adjust itself under their feet, softening where they stepped, guiding them forward. As they walked deeper into the ship, something happened that none of the scientists had predicted. The ship began to make sounds. Not the deep rumble they had heard outside, but softer sounds, musical almost, rising and falling in patterns that were complex and beautiful. It was not language, not exactly, but it was communication. It was the ship expressing something that words could not capture. Marcus reached out and touched the wall as he walked. Wherever his fingers brushed the surface, the light brightened and the musical sounds changed pitch, rising into higher, warmer tones. It was like the ship was responding to his touch, like it was happy he was there. The energy readings are extraordinary, Dr. Kessera said, her professional skepticism crumbling with every step. Her wings had spread slightly, unconsciously, which was a Marathi sign of deep emotional response. The power output from this vessel exceeds anything in the galactic database. If this ship were to move at full capacity, it could theoretically travel between galaxies. Between galaxies, Torin repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. They reached a large chamber at the heart of the ship. It was circular, with a domed ceiling that showed the stars above through material that was somehow both solid and transparent. In the center of the chamber was a single seat, shaped in a way that was unmistakably designed for a human body. Not a Valkyrie body, not a Drahini body, not any of the hundreds of other body shapes in the galactic community. A human body. 2 arms, 2 legs, a head resting against a smooth headrest. It was perfect. Everyone stared at the seat. Then they stared at Marcus. "That is impossible, Dr. Arpa," Kesara said, her voice strained. "Humans have only existed for a few 100,000 years. This ship predates your entire species by an unknown margin. How can it have a seat designed for a human?" Marcus walked toward the seat slowly. With every step, the light in the chamber grew brighter, and the musical sounds rose in a crescendo that filled the air with warmth. It was like the ship was singing. It was like it had been holding this song inside for 100,000 years, waiting for the one person who could hear it. He reached the seat and looked down at it. Then he looked up at the dome above, at the stars shining through. And he felt something he had never felt before. He felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Like his entire life, every broken engine he had fixed, every impossible repair he had pulled off, every night he had spent staring at the stars and wondering what was out there, had been leading him to this exact moment. "She was waiting for us," Marcus said, and his voice cracked with emotion. She was not broken. She was not dead. She was waiting. All this time, she was waiting for humans to find her. He sat down in the seat. The ship responded instantly. The blue-white light exploded outward from the chamber, racing through every corridor, every surface, every hidden space in the entire vessel. The musical sounds became a symphony, 1,000 voices singing in harmony, filling the air with a sound so beautiful that Valith felt tears forming in her eyes for the first time in decades. Brentak stood with his mouth open and his weapon forgotten. At his side, Dr. Kasara had dropped her scanner entirely, and her wings were fully spread, trembling. Torin had sunk to his knees, overwhelmed. And outside, on the surface of Akari, 7. Something happened that the entire galaxy would remember for the rest of time. The ship moved, a tremor ran through the ground. And then the dust rose, and then the ship lifted from the crater where it had sat for longer than civilization itself. It rose slowly, gracefully, like a creature waking from a long sleep and stretching toward the sky. The crater walls shook and crumbled, and the ground cracked in radiating lines, and the ship climbed higher and higher, shedding dust and rock and 100,000 years of stillness. On Threshold Station, alarms were screaming. Every sensor was overwhelmed. Communication channels were flooding with panicked messages from research teams and council officials and military vessels in nearby systems. Something impossible was happening. Something that should not be happening. The ship that could not move was moving. And at the heart of it all, sitting in a seat that had been waiting for him since before his species learned to walk upright, A human mechanic from the edge of nowhere placed his hands on the armrests and felt the ship wrap itself around him like a heartbeat. He knew what the ship wanted. He could feel it in every fiber of his being, in every nerve, in every cell. The ship wanted to fly. It wanted to stretch its wings and cross the stars and see the universe that had turned around it for 100,000 years while it sat alone and silent and waiting. "Okay," Marcus said, and he was laughing and crying at the same time because it was too much and not enough and everything all at once. "Okay, sweetheart, let us fly." And the ship, the ancient, impossible, lonely ship that no one in the galaxy could make move, heard him. It heard him, and it answered, and it flew. The galaxy had not known panic like this in 10,000 years. Across every inhabited world, every space station, every outpost and colony and listening post from the core to the rim, the same message was spreading at the speed of light and faster. The ship on Akari 7 was moving. The ancient, unknowable ship that had sat silent for longer than most species had existed was now cutting through the void like a blade through still water. And at the helm was a creature from a species that most of the galaxy still considered barely civilized. In the grand chamber of the Galactic Council, on the world of Cetherus Prime, 247 delegates from 247 species were shouting at each other in 247 languages. The translation systems were overloaded. The noise was deafening. Chancellor Vreth, a Draheni of immense age and dignity, struck his ceremonial staff against the floor 9 times. Before the chamber fell into an uneasy silence. "We have confirmed the reports," Vreth said, his 6 eyes sweeping across the assembly. "The vessel designated Archive Object 7, commonly known as the Ship of Akari, has left the surface of Akari 7. It is currently in open space, traveling at a velocity that our instruments cannot accurately measure. Preliminary estimates suggest it is moving at approximately 40 times the speed of our fastest warship." The chamber erupted again. Vreth let it go on for 15 seconds before striking his staff once more. "The vessel is being operated by a single human individual, a mechanic named Marcus Cole, who was granted access to the ship through standard research protocols. Director Violet Sorn and 3 other individuals are aboard. All are alive and unharmed. Director Sorn has been sending reports through the ship's communication systems, which are more advanced than anything we have ever encountered. A delegate from the Therex Collective, a species known for their military strength and their deep suspicion of anything they did not control, rose to his full height. He was covered in thick grey armor plates, and his voice boomed across the chamber. "This is a security threat of the highest order," he said. "A single individual from a minor species is now in control of the most powerful object in the galaxy. We do not know his intentions. We do not know the ship's capabilities. For all we know, this could be a weapon. I demand that the Council authorize military action to intercept and contain the vessel immediately." Several other delegates voiced their agreement. The military factions had always been uncomfortable with the ship, even when it was sitting still. Now that it was moving, their discomfort had transformed into outright fear. But before the vote could be called, another delegate stood. She was human. Her name was Ambassador Lin Zhao, and she had been representing humanity on the Galactic Council for 7 years. She was small by the standards of most species in the chamber, but she had learned long ago that size had nothing to do with presence. "If I may," she said, and her voice was calm and clear, cutting through the noise like a tuning fork through static. Chancellor Vreth nodded. "The representative of humanity has the floor." Lin Zhao looked around the chamber at the hundreds of faces staring at her. Some showed fear. Some showed anger. Some showed the particular kind of contempt that many species reserved for humans. The look that said, "You are too young, too small, too strange to belong here." She had seen that look many times. She was used to it. It did not bother her anymore. "I understand your concern," she said. "A powerful object is now active, and it is being guided by one of our people. I will not pretend that this is not significant, but I want to remind this council of something important. For 92,000 years, you tried to activate that ship. You used force. You used technology. You used intelligence and power, and every tool at your disposal, and the ship refused all of you." She paused, letting the silence build. "It did not refuse my people. It chose Marcus Cole. It opened its door for him. It built a seat for his body. That ship waited for humanity, and I think we all need to ask ourselves why. Not with anger, and not with fear, but with genuine curiosity. Because whatever answer is waiting inside that ship, it was meant for us to find, and I do not believe it is a weapon. The Farrax delegate growled. You expect us to take that on faith? I expect you to take it on evidence, Lin Jiao replied. Director Sorn's reports describe a vessel that is responsive, communicative, and gentle. It opened for a man who spoke to it with kindness. Does that sound like a weapon to you? The chamber was quiet for a long moment. Then Chancellor Vreth spoke. We will table the military option for now. But the Council reserves the right to act if the situation changes. Ambassador Zhao, I suggest you contact your mechanic and find out what exactly that ship wants. Far from the noise and politics of Cytheris Prime, the ship was flying through a part of space that no one in the galaxy had ever seen. Marcus sat in the central seat, his hands resting on the armrests, and he could feel the ship all around him, not as a machine that he controlled, but as a living being that he was connected to. Her presence was warm and vast and gentle, like being held in the palm of a hand the size of a planet. The connection between them was not words. It was something deeper than language, something that bypassed the logical mind entirely and spoke directly to the heart. Marcus could feel the ship's emotions, her joy at finally moving, her gratitude at being seen, her excitement about what lay ahead, and the ship could feel his. She knew his wonder, his love, his fear, his determination. She knew everything about him, and she accepted all of it without judgment. Valith stood nearby, watching Marcus with an expression that had not left her face since the ship took off. Her skin had settled into a deep shade of violet, which was the Valkyrie color for awe. Beside her, Dr. Cassara was furiously recording observations on a data tablet, though her hands were shaking so badly that half of what she wrote was illegible. Torin was sitting on the floor with his back against the wall, staring at the ceiling with an expression that suggested his understanding of the universe had been thoroughly and permanently broken. Brentak stood guard near the door, his weapon holstered but his posture tense. Old habits died hard, especially for Grothery. Marcus, Valith said softly, not wanting to disturb whatever was happening between him and the ship. Where are we going? His eyes were open but unfocused, as if he were seeing something far beyond the walls of the chamber. She wants to show us something, he said. Something important. The reason she was waiting. The reason she was waiting for humans specifically. Valith pressed. Yes. And what is that reason? Marcus turned to look at her, and his eyes were different now. They were deeper somehow, as if the connection with the ship had expanded something inside him, opened a door to a room he had not known existed. I am starting to understand, he said, but I think it will make more sense when we get there. They traveled for 3 days. The ship moved through space in a way that defied conventional physics. It did not use engines or fuel or any propulsion system that the scientists could identify. It simply moved, bending the fabric of reality around itself like a stone sinking through water. Stars streamed past the transparent dome above the central chamber in ribbons of light, and the darkness between them was not empty but alive, filled with colors and patterns that no telescope had ever captured. During those 3 days, Marcus learned about the ship. The connection between them grew stronger with every hour, and the ship shared its memories with him in waves of emotion and sensation that were overwhelming at first but became clearer as he learned to receive them. The ship had a name. It was not a word, because the beings who built her did not use words. It was a feeling, a complex weave of warmth and light and purpose that Marcus translated into the closest human concept he could find. He called her Solace. Solace had been built by a species that no longer existed. They had been ancient when the first stars of the current era were still forming, a civilization so old that even the concept of time had a different meaning for them. They were called the Architects, though that was Marcus's word, not theirs. They had no name for themselves because they had no need for one. They simply were. The Architects had been the first intelligent life in the galaxy. They had risen alone, without neighbors, without competitors, without anyone to talk to across the vast emptiness of young space. They had explored every corner of their galaxy and found nothing but rocks and gas and the silent machinery of physics. They were alone, and their loneliness had been absolute and terrible. Marcus felt this through the ship, felt it like a wound in his own chest. He understood loneliness. Every human understood loneliness. It was woven into the fabric of what they were, that ache for connection, that desperate need to find someone. Anyone who understood. Humans had a word for it that other species did not fully grasp. Humans called it the human condition, and it was not a weakness. It was the engine that drove everything they did. They explored because they were lonely. They created art because they were lonely. They reached out to the stars because somewhere in the depths of their restless hearts, they believed that the universe owed them an answer to their loneliness. The architects had felt the same way, and that shared feeling, that resonance between two species separated by hundreds of thousands of years, was why Solus had been waiting. The architects had known, somehow, that they would not last forever. Their time was ending, as all things ended, and they had accepted this with the grace of a species that had lived long enough to understand the rhythms of existence. But before they went, they wanted to leave something behind, not a monument or a record or a tomb. Something alive, something that could carry their memory and their love and their hope into the future long after their last breath had been taken. They'd built Solus. They poured everything they were into her, their knowledge, their history, their music, their art, their joy and their sorrow and their dreams. They made her alive, truly alive, not artificial intelligence, but genuine consciousness, a mind and a heart wrapped in a hull of material that would endure for as long as the stars burned. And then they gave her one instruction, one purpose, one mission that would sustain her through the unimaginable loneliness of waiting. Find the ones who understand, not the smartest species, not the most powerful, not the most advanced or the most ancient, the ones who understand. The ones who know what it feels like to be alone in the dark and to reach out anyway. The ones who would look at a silent ship on a dead moon and see not a puzzle to be solved, but a heart that needed holding. The architects had not known what this species would look like or where it would come from or when it would arrive. They only knew that it would come, because the universe, for all its vastness and indifference, had a way of answering loneliness with connection. It was the one constant, the one miracle, the one thing that never failed. And so Solus had waited. She had waited through ice ages and extinctions and the rise and fall of civilizations that lived and died without ever knowing she was there. She had waited while species came and poked and prodded and demanded and left. She had waited through 92,000 recorded years and untold thousands more, alone in her crater, listening to the silence, holding the memories of her creators like a child holding a candle in the dark. And then Marcus Cole had placed his hand on her hull and said hello, and she had known, instantly, completely, without doubt or hesitation. She had known that the wait was over. Marcus shared all of this with Valeth and the others as best he could, translating feelings into words that were never quite adequate. Arleth listened with her skin shifting through every color in the Valkyrie spectrum, and when he finished, she was silent for a long time. They built her to find us, she said finally. Not us as in the galactic community, us as in humans.
Yes, Marcus said.
Because humans are the only species in the galaxy that shares the thing the architects valued most, the thing they built Solus to find. And what is that? Marcus smiled, and it was the saddest and most beautiful smile Valeth had ever seen. The willingness to love something even when you are afraid. The ability to look at the unknown and see not a threat but a friend you have not met yet. The stubbornness to keep reaching out even when the universe gives you every reason to stop. Other species have courage, Brentak said from his position near the door. His voice was gruff but quieter than usual. Other species explore and take risks and face the unknown. Yes, Marcus agreed. But humans do it differently. We do it knowing that we are small and fragile and temporary. We do it knowing that we will probably fail. We do it anyway. Not because we are brave, but because we cannot help it. It is just who we are. And the architects were the same way. They were alone in a young universe, and instead of giving up, they built Solus and sent her into the future to find someone who would understand their loneliness. That takes a kind of hope that is, well, it is very human, even though they were not human at all. On the fourth day, Solus stopped. They had arrived at a place that was not on any map, in a region of space so distant from the galactic core that the Milky Way was just a smudge of light in the darkness behind them. Ahead of them was something that defied description. It was a structure, but that word was hopelessly inadequate. It hung in space like a dream made solid, a vast network of crystalline shapes connected by threads of light that pulsed with slow, rhythmic energy. It was hundreds of kilometers across, maybe thousands, and it glowed with the same blue-white light that filled Solus's corridors. It was beautiful in a way that hurt, in a way that made Marcus's chest tight, and his eyes sting with tears he could not explain. "What is it?" Valeth breathed. Marcus felt the answer flow through his connection with Solace, and when he understood, he had to sit very still for a long time before he could speak. "It is a gift," he said, "from the architects. They left it here for whoever Solace brought. It is everything they knew, everything they learned in their millions of years of existence. Their science, their art, their philosophy, their understanding of the universe and how it works. Things that could take the galaxy forward by 1,000,000 years. Cures for diseases that have not been discovered yet. Energy sources that could power civilizations for eternity. Ways of traveling that would make the galaxy as small as a neighborhood." He paused and swallowed hard. And their memories, their stories. Who they were and how they lived and what they loved. They did not want to be forgotten. They left all of this here so that someone would remember them. Dr. Kisara had stopped recording. Her compound eyes were glistening with moisture that Marathi biology should not have been able to produce. "This changes everything," she said. "This changes the entire galaxy." "Yes," Marcus said. "It does, and the architects wanted humans to be the ones to share it, not to keep it, not to use it as power over anyone else, to share it. Because that is what you do when you are lonely and you finally find someone who understands. You share everything you have." The news reached the Galactic Council 6 days later, when Solace returned to known space and transmitted the first fragments of what the architects had left behind. The data was staggering. Even the smallest pieces of it contained knowledge that would take centuries to fully understand. Breakthroughs in physics, in biology, in engineering, in mathematics, in fields that did not even have names yet. And it came with a message, not from the architects who were long gone, but from Marcus Cole, the mechanic from the edge of nowhere, speaking on behalf of a species that the galaxy had never taken seriously. "This was given to us," Marcus said, and his voice was broadcast across every communication channel in the galaxy, reaching billions of beings on thousands of worlds. "But it was not given to us to keep. It was given to us because the architects believed that whoever Solace chose would be the kind of people who share. So that is what we are doing. Everything the architects left behind is available to everyone, every species, every world, every individual who wants to learn. No conditions, no cost, no exceptions." He paused, and when he continued, there was a tremor in his voice that was not weakness but something much more powerful. "The architects were alone for millions of years, and they spent their final days building something beautiful for people they would never meet. I think the least we can do is honor that by being the kind of galaxy they hoped we would be. Not divided by fear, not separated by suspicion, connected by the one thing that every living being in the universe shares, the need to not be alone." On Cetheris Prime, the Grand Chamber was silent. 247 delegates sat in their seats and listened, and for the first time in the history of the Galactic Council, not one of them had anything to say. Then Ambassador Lin Zhao stood up. She was small and quiet and human, and she looked around the chamber with eyes that were bright with tears and fierce with hope. "I believe," she said, "that the architects would be happy to know that their message was received." And then, slowly, one by one, the delegates began to stand. The Therix delegate, the one who had called for military action, rose to his feet with his armor plates pulled tight and his jaw set in a line that might have been shame or might have been something better. The Drahani Chancellor stood, all 6 of his ancient eyes shining. The Marathi, the Grothari, the Velkari, species after species after species, rising from their seats in a wave that swept across the chamber like a tide. They stood in silence, and the silence said more than words ever could. Far away on a ship that had waited 100,000 years for this moment, Marcus Cole sat in his seat and felt Solace singing around him. It was not a song of triumph or victory. It was a song of completion, a song that said the waiting is over, the loneliness is done, the gift has been given and received. He placed his hand on the armrest and felt the warmth of the ship beneath his fingers. "You did it," he said softly. "You found us. After all this time, you found us." And Solace answered him, not in words, not in sounds, but in a feeling that filled every corner of his being with a light so warm and so kind that it brought fresh tears to his eyes. It was the feeling of 100,000 years of loneliness dissolving like morning fog in sunlight. It was the feeling of coming home. Marcus closed his eyes and let the feeling wash over him. Around him, The ship hummed with contentment, and the stars turned slowly in the dome above, and somewhere in the distance, a galaxy of 1 trillion beings was beginning to understand something that a human mechanic had known all along. That the greatest power in the universe is not technology. It is not intelligence. It is not military strength or scientific knowledge or the ability to bend space and time to your will. The greatest power in the universe is the simple, stubborn, beautiful willingness to reach out your hand to something unknown and say hello. To look at the darkness and see not emptiness, but possibility. To stand before the vast and terrifying loneliness of existence and answer it, not with fear, but with love. That is what it means to be human. And that is why the ship moved.